Albert Einstein said, "The more I learn, the more I don't know." Now, I think we would all agree that Einstein was a pretty smart man. He was of higher education and higher intellectual abilities than many people of his age and still even today. However, even with all his knowledge, which is far superior to that of anyone around him, he had the humility to admit that he did not know it all. We've had people come and go through our Thursday Bible studies here at the church. Some have stayed, and just as many have left for one reason or another. We recently had a visitor who said they wouldn't be back because I did not agree with them. Apparently, this person is among the group that has it all figured out, and there's no room for more learning. Fortunately, no one in our current group falls into that category. That's why we continue to meet on Thursdays to learn more of what it is that we don't know. Now, the idea of continuing education is not only for the Bible. When learning itself stops, the mind begins to stagnate. Neural connections weaken, memory declines, and the brain slips into autopilot. Without the challenge of new information, curiosity fades. If you're not learning something new, you don't have anything to be curious about. And that makes it harder to adapt or to stay creative in a rapidly changing world. And I think you would agree with me that our world today is changing rapidly. Much more rapidly than it did for our parents, who also saw changes. And the Jews of Jesus' day saw change, but not as rapid. But Jesus is bringing change to the world of the Jews, and the Jews were having a hard time adapting, even at their pace. We have a hard time adapting at our pace. He told the most learned men of his day that they still needed to learn. In Matthew chapter 9 and verse 13, we read, "Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." Now, Jesus was speaking to the Pharisees who had questioned him because he was eating with the despicables, the deplorables of their day, tax collectors and sinners. Now, in our day, we may understand the disdain for tax collectors, but sinners? Who are they? To whom were the Pharisees referring? They were talking about the same type of people that we talk about when we imply that someone is less than a Christian for what they believe or do. We are saying, I'm not like them. And the Pharisees called anyone who was not like them a sinner. Now, the implication when we talk about the faults of others is that we are better than that. It may be true that you don't have the particular fault for which you're pointing out in the other person, but just because you don't have that fault does not make you better. That's what Jesus was bringing out to the woman caught in adultery. He didn't say, you are adulterers and therefore you shouldn't have brought her to me. He said, if you're without sin, you throw the stone. They were claiming that she was not without sin. The only reason we put others down is to make ourselves look better. Now, that attitude is so much like a Pharisee that I wonder why people don't see it. But we read in Luke chapter 18, verses 9 through 12, Jesus also told this parable to those who trusted in themselves that they were righteous, and therefore they treated others with contempt. The two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing over by himself, prayed like this. He said, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. That Pharisee said it plainly, that he was not like others. Now for us, it may not be a conscious rationale. We may not say that in that way, but it's usually there nonetheless when we begin to criticize and put others down because they're not like us. I want you to notice, though, the form of rebuke that Jesus gives to this situation. He did not scold them as he usually did. We can think of the many times that Jesus scolded the Pharisees, but this time he didn't scold them. He simply appealed to their supposed higher knowledge and told them to go learn something. Much like our recent visitor, the Pharisees were proud of their learning. To tell someone who thinks they are highly educated that they need to go learn something, they would probably receive that as an insult. But Jesus said to go learn what the statement meant. Now he was quoting from Hosea, where he reads, For I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings, in Hosea chapter 6 and verse 6. Now, because they were Pharisees, it's safe for us to assume that they were familiar with this passage. They had read and discussed this prophet probably more than once in their career. However, due to their accusing of Jesus for his motives for eating with sinners, Jesus knew that they did not fully understand the meaning of that text. And here's the kicker. I hope you get it. He didn't explain it to them. He didn't tell them what it meant. I've had people get irritated with me because I won't tell them what a passage means. Instead, I ask them questions to try to get them to think about what it is that they're asking. Jesus didn't even do that. He didn't try to pull it out of them. He told them to go figure it out for themselves. People today will respond to something like that with something like, how am I supposed to figure it out if I don't know what it means? Good question. How do we learn? How did the Pharisees learn? Yep. There were schools for them to learn about the scriptures of their day, the same as we have seminaries and Bible colleges today. But the problem with denominational schools and colleges is that there's very few of them that teach you how to think. Most of them tell you what to think. For instance, you could not graduate from Dallas Theological Seminary if you do not accept the inerrancy of the Bible. Or if you hold to a conservative view of marriage and sexuality, you could still graduate from Princeton Theological Seminary, but why would you want a degree from a school that you did not agree with their beliefs? The Jews of Jesus' day did not attend schools that told them what to believe or what to think. Their schools were a place of learning how to think. After schooling was complete, though, learning did not stop. In our world today, many times as I encounter people, adults who have been through school, they're done with learning. Not a good thing. The Jews had Havruta and Midrash as their methods of learning. Now, I don't this is not the place here to go into methods and techniques of teaching and learning. But Havruta is basically peer-to-peer study, and Midrash is the rabbinical interpretation being presented to you. Peer-to-peer learning is incorporated as early as the 3rd grade in Jewish schools. That means the students, 8, 9-year-old kids, are teaching each other. This Havruta style is what we try to incorporate into our Thursday studies. I'm not there to tell the group that comes what to believe. Hopefully we gather that together as the Lord gives instruction to each one of us in the way that He does, and we learn from what others say. So Jesus told the Pharisees that even though they had learned rules and regulations and applications of the law, their learning was not complete. They needed to go deeper. So He said, go and learn. Learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Now, in this church, we have learned before about the idea of sacrifice not being the full extent of what God wanted from His people. The Jews of His day were hung up on the minutiae of the law and its requirements, but they could never come to an understanding of its intent. For instance, they knew that you were not supposed to wear mixed garments, not a garment of wool and a garment of linen. They knew and understand that, but they did not know what that meant. Why that particular rule was there. Was it only about the clothes that you wear? Much deeper than that. If someone dared, though, to wear 2 kinds of cloth at the same time, they were obviously a sinner because they did not know the law. That was how the Pharisees judged people. Jesus said that they knew the law, but did not understand its intent. In Luke chapter 11 and verse 42, we read, "But woe to you, Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and every herb, and neglect justice and the love of God. These ought you to have done without neglecting the others." Where's the rule about justice and the love of God? Mostly we had just the rules. So I asked the question, would Jesus speak these same words today to His followers? Are His followers more intent on doing and believing right than they are on living right? We've been taught to believe that living right means you don't get drunk, you don't cuss, and you don't commit adultery. You don't cheat on your taxes. That's what we've been taught to live right. But Jesus taught that living right was shown by how we treat others. He taught this concept through His words and His actions. How you treat somebody else. His actions, though, were a catalyst for the scorn of the Pharisees because they only knew how to do right things, even with wrong motives. But the words of Jesus destroyed all the minutiae the Pharisees focused on. Jesus said, love God, love your neighbor. And when I've been thinking about that for the last few days, I also realize He didn't tell you how. How to love God. How to love your neighbor. But the parable of the separation of sheep and goats exemplifies this. People without mercy focus on what you do or don't do, not on how you treat others. People of mercy realize that giving a cup of cold water to a thirsty person is of more value than a pen for perfect Sunday school attendance. I was asked, before I had been serving the Lord 2 years, I was asked to lead a revival at a small church in north central Florida. But first I had to be examined by the Board of Deacons. And I gladly submitted to that. I had no problem with that. I went and answered their questions. And I forget the specific question, but it had to do with tithing. And I said, in my naivety or my truth, I don't know, I said that most people, when it comes to tithing, if all they had left was their tithe on the way to church Sunday morning and someone needed help, they would reject them because the tithe had to go to the church. I wasn't allowed to teach the revival for that statement because I did not emphasize the tithe to the church. Focused on the finer points of the law. Now, most of us here today, and probably most of those listening, began their walk with the Lord thinking that doing right was the way to be right. But that kind of thinking catered to our ego and caused us to believe that others may not be as righteous as they think. So what's the upshot? I believe the Lord is calling us today, every day, to go and learn what the sacrifice of mercy looks like in our daily lives. How can we extend mercy? How can we show compassion? How can we express the love of God in our everyday activity with other people, strangers included? Amen.